In this election campaign, parties are making big and sometimes, yes, expensive promises, which has some voters asking, can parties deliver on those promises and still manage the public purse responsibly? This week, we're asking parties how they're going to pay for their pledges. We've heard so far from the Greens and the Liberals. Next up, the Conservatives. Garnet Genis is an Alberta Conservative candidate. He joins us now from Edmonton. Hi, Mr. Genis. Nice to see you. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you. Great to be with you today.
Your party has framed itself as the only fiscally responsible option for Canadians in this election. But apart from your promise to balance the budget in 5 years, your promised spending and deficits over the first 4 years are almost identical to what the Liberals promised in the last budget. Is it disingenuous to characterize your platform as one of fiscal restraint in contrast to the Liberals?
Well, I think the differences are very clear in the platforms, and Canadians will see them. For instance, our party is going to have a balanced budget within 5 years, which is completely different from the government. The current government has no plan to balance the budget. And unlike the Liberal government, our plan is fully costed by the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Remember, the Liberals brought in the ability to have the Parliamentary Budget Officer do costing, and yet they don't want their platform costed. Ours is fully costed. It's a balanced budget plan that increases investments in key areas. Canadians can have confidence in it as a result.
Well, actually, the entire thing isn't costed. Something, for example, like other operating expenses, you list a couple of things that might fall under that category, but it isn't individually costed to see if it matches up to the promised savings. But I just want to get back to the first point I'm making, because I'm looking at the projected, and to be fair, you lay this out in your platform, but the projected deficits over the next 4 years until it's balanced, and almost to the dollar, they line up with what the PBO had said the Liberals' deficits would be according to the last budget. Now, that doesn't include their spending that they've promised in this election, but basically what they promised in 2019 is almost identical to what you're promising now. Is this really a budget or a platform that exercises any fiscal restraint?
Well, I think what you're pointing out is that our plan is prudent, it's gradual, it gets us back to a balanced budget within 5 years.
Is that what the Liberals was in last year as well then?
Well, the Liberal plan is not prudent. You've seen during the election how they're piling on new spending commitments that are totally uncosted. So if you look at what we're proposing in our platform, what they're proposing in theirs, there's a huge gap. They're talking about new spending, and our proposals are prudent, are targeted, and every aspect of our commitments are fully costed so the Canadians know where the money is going to come from and what it's going to go to, and they know that we'll be back to a balanced budget within 5 years. That's what we owe to our kids.
Once again, though, there isn't specific costing attached to, let's take the promise of other operating expenses. Up to $5 billion a year you're projecting you'll save by 2024. You list things like reining in March Madness spending, tightening procurement rules, reducing travel and hospitality expenses, reducing the use of consultants. None of that is itemized, though. We have no idea how you got to the $5 billion figure, how much of each is going to be cut, and whether or not it will entail other additional operating expenses beyond those that you list.
Well, I think what we've seen in decades past, maybe not with the current Liberals, but in past governments, Conservatives and Liberals have been able to identify efficiencies within government and realize those efficiencies through a detailed, effective process. We've committed to increasing spending for vital areas like healthcare and social transfers to the provinces. We've committed to finding specific targeted areas of savings, things like March Madness that you mentioned, where billions of dollars more is spent in March of every year as public servants look to the end of their budgets. We've committed to keeping hiring levels at 2021 levels. These are prudent measures, so Canadians can have confidence that we will move towards a balanced budget, but in a prudent, efficient way, and that we'll continue to make investments in vital areas.
You know what the Liberals are saying, right? They're comparing the language that you just used to exactly what Ontarians heard from Doug Ford prior to the election back in 2018, where they said, all we're going to do is we care about the fiscal situation of this province. We care about bringing us out of this deficit situation, and we're going to only do it by looking at efficiencies. And what ended up happening was a whole lot more than just finding efficiencies. Instead, 10,000 teaching jobs are eliminated, and class sizes are bigger, right? I'm not saying conclusively that that's what you're going to do, but I'm saying, have you not opened the door to the Liberals being able to make that comparison?
Well, I think, a couple things that are different. In Ontario, the government there was responding to over a decade of Liberal rule. In Canada, we've only had 4 years of Liberal rule, which means that we're able to move back to...
To be fair, there were deficits run by the previous Tory government
through a financial crisis,
yeah,
and we had a balanced budget. We had a balanced budget at the time of the change of government, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the government's own fiscal monitor would attest to that we had a balanced balanced budget when we handed over government, and the Liberals plunged us into deep deficit. So what we've done in this election is we've presented the most detailed platform of any party. You don't have PBO costing for many of the Liberals' key commitments. They don't have a plan. We're showing exactly where the money's going to come from and where it's going to go to. And we've been open about some of the cuts we're going to make. For instance, a $1.5 billion cut to corporate welfare. I think Canadians, when they pay their taxes, they expect government to use their money to provide vital public services, not to give money to companies who are already doing very well. So we've got a clear costed plan that shows where the money's coming from and where the money's going to.
Yeah, you do have an exact number that you've put on, for example, corporate welfare, but and on cutting foreign aid, for example, but where these finding efficiencies are concerned, and you'll understand that that does sort of raise eyebrows in Ontario, because that is what they've heard before, the idea of just finding efficiencies and a list of 5 things that might be under that label. It opens the door. It opens the idea that perhaps there's going to be more than efficiencies there. I'm just asking, are you saying unequivocally it will not be beyond the list that's being provided?
So Vash, to be very clear, we haven't just said in a sort of generic, open-ended way we're going to find efficiencies. We've actually said specifically what those efficiencies are.
But you haven't ascribed a dollar amount to each of them.
Well, we've identified key areas where I think most people would understand, having read the detail in the platform. Yes, these are efficiencies that can be realized. One of them is outside consultants, right? We have capable public servants, and yet very often we spend so much more money on outside public servants. And look, the details are there in terms of where these areas are going to come from. And obviously there's a process for prudently identifying where those areas are going to be. But we've also been clear in our commitment to maintain funding to frontline public services, to increase at a rate of 3% per year transfers to the provinces for vital social services, to maintain existing staffing levels at 20 to 21 levels. I think Canadians understand that, if we can provide the same services while, for instance, reducing the real estate holdings of the government, holding back March Madness, not paying outside consultants, while increasing funding to frontline services, that's a plan that really responds to their needs and helps them get ahead.
I guess I'm asking, though, are you guaranteeing that nothing beyond what you've outlined here will be cut?
So we've been clear about where we're going to cut and where we're not going to cut. We've made clear commitments to increase funding for frontline services in healthcare, in social transfers to the provinces, in other areas. Canadians can have confidence in our plan because it's costed, because we've said where we won't cut. In fact, we've said where we'll make increases, and we've also said where we will cut. Like corporate welfare, you mentioned the reduction in foreign aid, saying that, yes, we shouldn't be giving foreign aid to countries that are doing relatively well. So people might disagree with those decisions, but we've been clear about what those decisions will be.
With respect, that doesn't really specifically answer the question about whether or not anything will go beyond what you've outlined, but I take your point. I want to ask you one more question about the infrastructure commitment that you've made, because part of how you're going to save is by reprofiling. Some call it cuts, you call it reprofiling, about $18 billion over a longer span of years than the Liberals originally promised to spend it within. I just want to ask you, because in your platform, it explicitly says, although we know, and I'm quoting here, that Justin Trudeau's infrastructure budget lapsed 40% in past years, no one seems to know how much the government is currently spending on infrastructure. If you don't know how much the government is currently spending on infrastructure, how did you know that you could reprofile specifically $18 billion?
Well, we know the size of the envelope. And what we've said is that we are going to make those same commitments, but over a slightly longer period of time. And as you quite rightly mentioned in your preamble, the government is making big commitments on infrastructure, but is actually failing to deliver that spending and failing to track the impact of that spending effectively. So because we know the size of the envelope, it's easy for us to look at those numbers and say, if we reprofile this over a longer period of time so that we can actually more effectively deliver those dollars and ensure that they are hitting key priorities for communities and provinces. If we extend the timeline for that, do it more effectively, we can actually ensure that, unlike with the Liberals, when we're in government, the dollars actually get spent.
I just want to know, though, exactly how you came up with the $18 billion figure, and if you've specifically picked projects, for example, that will be delayed until later years. Do you have one specific example for me?
So we've identified key priority projects. We've made announcements about that in this election.
And those are the ones you're going to do. But what about the ones you're not going to do?
Well, so the government has made some specific specific spending commitments as part of their infrastructure, and we have committed to moving forward with those. But their large envelope, it's open-ended. There's not a lot of clarity around it, which creates certain challenges in responding specifically. But what we do know is we do know the size of that envelope, and we've said we're going to extend that envelope over a longer period of time to make sure the dollars are actually spent in an effective and efficient way.
I guess if I'm the mayor, though, of a city or the premier of a province, I'm wondering what exactly that means for me, and your party at this point doesn't have an answer for that.
Well, no, what I would say to that, Mayor, is that the Liberals have made big promises, but they failed to deliver on infrastructure. They're clearly not as advertised, and the Parliamentary Budget Officer's analyses have shown that very clearly. You can have confidence with Conservatives that what you see is what you're going to get. We've been clear about our commitments. We're going to deliver on those commitments. It's a balanced budget framework. It ensures funding goes to vital areas, and people know where the money's coming from, and they know where it's going to. That's the difference between us and the Liberals. When you have all this out-of-control, unbudgeted spending, that leads to worse cuts later on. That's why fiscal prudence up front is so important for Canadians as well as for municipalities.
I would only underline, as I said at the beginning, that the Liberals' original plan in 2019 almost mirrors your plan exactly right now. But I do have to go. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time today, Mr. Genis.
Thank you very much.
Alberta Conservative candidate Garnet Genis. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.